My name is Patrick J. McGinnis, and I coined the term FOMO. That's short for fear of missing out, and it's why some people end up following the crowd. But we're not like them. We're part of a new species that isn't afraid to do things differently. I call us FOMO Sapiens. And this is the show where you'll meet people like us, phenomenal FOMO Sapiens, to learn how they find the courage and the ideas to live exceptional lives. FOMO. FOMO. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of FOMO Sapiens, the show for people who don't just follow the crowd, but instead take their own path to success in business and in life. I'm your host, Patrick J. McGinnis, venture capitalist by day, author and podcaster by night, and as you well know, FOMO Sapiens 24/7. And our topic today is how to let go of perfection. Listen, it's interesting. I've been receiving a lot of books on this topic. The publishers are nice. They send me the books, and it is a hot topic for 2023. And I've been looking at a lot of these books, and I'll have a few of these authors on because it is a really important topic. Perfection and FOMO, they're side by side. We're all strivers here. If you are listening to this show, you're a striver. And so you know what it's like to deal with perfectionism. It's very limiting. It is not a good thing. But sometimes I think as we grow up, we think being perfect, being super hardcore perfect and stuff is the way to get ahead. That was certainly my mindset. I was wrong. And so we're going to be talking about that. Now, the wonderful author I have today talks about this topic and particularly looks at it through the lens of women. It's for everybody, this show, so don't leave me. But for the women in the audience or for people who know women who deal with perfection and perfectionism, this is a great episode. And my guest today is Homaira Kabir. She's the author of Goodbye Perfect, How to Stop Pleasing, Proving, and Pushing for Others and Live for Yourself. Now, I met Homaira many years ago through her brother, and she was looking to write a book, and we were talking about it. And then lo and behold, she does it. She gets a publisher, and she called me up and she asked me to blurb her book, which I was so happy to do. I'm going to read you my blurb because it says exactly how I feel. I say, quote, "Why do we find it so difficult to let go of behaviors we know are getting in our way? Goodbye Perfect will help you to do so with more ease, joy, and success." End quote. So that's my hot take on this book. Now here's my hot take on Homaira, or more appropriately, here is her bio. Homaira holds a master's degree in coaching psychology and in positive psychology, and she is the author of the new book, Goodbye Perfect, How to Stop Pleasing, Proving, and Pushing for Others and Live for Yourself. It's a mouthful, but I like it. All right, now, today we're going to be getting into, first of all, again, as I said before, this is not just for the ladies. However, we are going to be talking about specific issues that women deal with in the workplace and beyond. And so for the men listening, either share this episode with somebody who you know could benefit, or think about how your behaviors might be contributing to some of the stuff we're going to be talking about. I think it's a good time to focus on that. We're going to be talking about some interesting topics and concepts that you may not have come up with before. The idea of fragile confidence and optimal confidence. Very important stuff. And also attachment theory. I actually had heard that term, but I didn't know what it was. And we get into it. I did some research. Very interesting stuff. So there's some psychology here. If you like the psychology, guys, if this is one of these shows where you're going to get what you like, because we're getting into psychology today, which is a topic that obviously my guest knows a ton about. Now, a small ask, share this episode with somebody who could benefit and tell them to start listening to FOMO Sapiens. I would love to meet your friends, as it were. All right, and now on to the interview. As you know, I start every interview with the same question, and the question is this: what's a formative decision you've had to make to get to where you are today?
First of all, Patrick, thank you so much for having me on the podcast. I've really looked forward to this, and the question that you're asking me is a big question, and I guess it's a very important question, so I would love to answer it. For me, I think it happened around my 40th birthday. I know I've written about it in the book as well, but around that time, there were a couple of deaths in the family, not the immediate family, but I think they made me question deeply simply because I was also 40. It felt like a big milestone in my life. And I started wondering that if I were to die tomorrow or the next week or something, would I feel that I'd lived my life fully? And unfortunately, the answer didn't seem to be yes. I mean, it was everything seemed to be fine in my life. I mean, outwardly, I was living a great life. I was married, I had 4 kids, I had a therapy practice, I enjoyed my work. But then I didn't feel it was my life. I felt it was somebody else's life, which was going very well. But I felt that if I were to die the next day, I wouldn't feel that I'd lived this life. And so it just led me to all those. I'm glad I listened to the question, because I know so many of us arrive at these transition points in our lives and crossroads in our lives. And we kind of have these questions, but then we never take the time to listen, because they're not easy questions and there are no easy answers either. I didn't know what was missing. I just knew something was missing. And so that kind of took me down the road of positive psychology. I found out around that time that there was a science that studied this, which is called positive psychology. It is the science of a meaningful life, a life of flourishing. And so I started that program. And I not only did positive psychology, I combined it with coaching psychology. So it was a double degree, because I just didn't want the answers for myself. I also wanted to help other people with it, because, like I said, I had this therapy practice. And I always felt that I got my clients from, let's say, -5, -10 to 0. But that 0 was a very unstable place to be in. And I felt that if I could take them forward to +10, +20, what was possible in their lives, their recovery would be far stronger. So that is what I did. And then my postgraduate research was on women's flourishing, what helped us flourish. It led me to this place where I realized that what got in the way of flourishing was this kind of high confidence that's called fragile confidence. And then the rest of it, I mean, then I started my coaching practice, then the book came, and I just felt that I had finally found my purpose. I was doing the work that I came here to do. And so, yes, if I were to die next week, I wouldn't feel I had done the full version of it, but at least I would feel I am living my life and I'm doing the work that I'm here to do, and that feels very fulfilling.
It's a good practice to ask yourself that question. You don't have to wait till you're 40, by the way. You can do it every day of your life, although it's time consuming. So you maybe want to do it every day, but it is a valuable thing to do. And I think it's sometimes just do the self audit around, like, if you don't have to say if I die, but like if I were to sit down and, it's like people ask you how you're doing, what's going on with you? And if you don't feel good about the answer, that can be a sign too. And you don't even have to think about death if you don't want to. But I love that you did that exercise and that it spurred a lot of action, because when you think about what you did, it's not, existential dread when you take that and then you turn it into action. Now, your book, which is out now, is called Goodbye Perfect: How to Stop Pleasing, Proving, and Pushing for Others and Live for Yourself. And this really is about, it's about this, something that a lot of us do, especially as type A pleaser types, which is, striving for perfection. When I was a little kid, my nickname was Perfect Pat, believe it or not. It's terrible. But I was definitely a perfectionist. My teacher actually in third grade I was supposed to get all A's. She gave me an A- to teach me the valuable lesson of not being perfect, but all it made me do was cry. So anyway, didn't learn much in third grade, but life teaches you this lesson, right? Yeah. You have to learn it one way or the other. But why was this for you the topic that you wanted to conquer?
Yeah, that's an awesome question. So, like I said a little bit earlier, I didn't set out to study confidence or perfection or any of those things. I set out to study flourishing, but then I found out that what got in the way of it was this fragile confidence, which can look like high confidence on the outside, but what's missing is deep-seated implicit beliefs of worthiness. And as a result of those feelings of lack, we get hooked onto perfectionistic behaviors to kind of protect ourselves from the feelings of lack. And the way to move from fragile confidence to optimal confidence, which is the path to flourishing, is by building those implicit feelings. Because explicitly in our heads, both those types of confidence show up as, yes, I know how to do this. Yes, I'm a good person, whatever it is. But deep down, you don't have them. So building those implicit beliefs is how we move from fragile to optimal. And when we develop those implicit beliefs, when we nurture those implicit beliefs, then we don't need those perfectionistic behaviors anymore, because we don't need to protect ourselves from anything anymore. So Goodbye Perfect is really a way of moving from fragile to optimal confidence as a way of living our best lives. So in a way, the book is really about flourishing, but letting go of perfection is what happens en route to flourishing.
Now, let's get into this a little bit more. You mentioned these two terms, fragile confidence and optimal confidence, which I hadn't come across before. How would you define those two? And what is, you mentioned sort of this internal sort of, you're sort of getting your beliefs in line to be able to take you from one to the other on this continuum. Mm-hmm. Talk about those two definitions, and then let's get into sort of how one makes that move.
Mm-hmm. So fragile confidence is, well, technically it is basically explicit beliefs, which is the thoughts that you have in your head, explicit beliefs, positive explicit beliefs underpinned by negative implicit beliefs. So that would be kind of the definition. But how it shows up is that you're dependent on all of these perfectionistic behaviors, and there are many types of them. So there's perfection, there's pleasing, there's proving, there's showing that you're superior, there's wanting to show that your life is perfect, all of those. There are 6, and we can dive into them.
It's like posting on Facebook, people. You know who you are. You Instagram perfect people. You're doing this. Okay, continue, please.
And then optimal confidence is positive, explicit beliefs, feelings, thoughts that you have, underpinned by positive, implicit ones as well. And positive doesn't mean, yay, I'm the best and I'm awesome. It is just realistic. Like it is implicit beliefs of 2 things in particular. I'm a good person. I have something of value. I'm worthy and have something of value to offer. That's called belonging. And there's mastery, which is, again, these deep-seated feelings of I can deal with whatever comes in the way in my pursuit of something that is meaningful to me. And so both of them are aligned. And that creates beautiful feedback loops, because when you do something well, it sinks into your implicit, because obviously the two are aligned. So your implicit brain accepts it sinks into it, it makes you step out further, you take action again. So it creates these feedback loops. Whereas in fragile confidence, they don't sink in. It just, in your head, it, but then you're still afraid to take action. You still feel like an imposter after something goes well. And if something doesn't go well, you're like, you know what, I knew it. And then you go down that downward spiral. And so it shows up as shame, it shows up as blame, it shows up as all those things.
FOMO. So let's talk about this. Give us an example of somebody that you've worked with, or somebody that you respect, who has kind of done the work of going from one to the other. What does it look like? What does one need to do?
Yeah, exactly. So I can give you an example of a client. So there's so many of the women who come to me who are in this stage of they're experiencing setbacks or criticism, and it's really bringing them down. And so there's this particular client who was a highly ambitious person. She was recruited into this firm for change management. That was her role. She was brought in to do something which was, overturned quite a bit of what was happening there. And she was highly ambitious. She was a very high performer. She was very used to being successful in the work that she'd been doing at all the previous places that she'd worked at. Well, here it was a much more difficult and much more challenging situation. Plus, her team, she had to do quite a bit of layoffs. The team wasn't happy with it. They weren't cooperating. She was just in this place where she wasn't receiving the approval or the success that she was used to, because in fragile confidence, you depend on that to feel good about yourself. And so there was just this downward spiral that began. She began questioning herself, very unhappy with the work that she was doing, came to me asking, should I just leave? Maybe this is not the right thing for me. And so the work revolved around trying to understand why this work was meaningful to her, why it was important to her, really connecting to the big why. That is always very important, because then you can face the challenges and the criticism and keep going, because it's not the immediate success or the immediate praise that you're looking for. So one was that. But then the other was, how do you deal with the criticism when it happens? How do you move on from the failure when it happens? And most importantly, how do you deal with the emotional aspect of it? Because it's not always head work that we need to do. Most of them can say, yes, I failed. And, it doesn't mean that I'm a terrible person. In their head, they know it, but it's the emotional angst. It's how do you sit with that? And I think that is even more so for women. So how do you ride the wave of that? How do you deal in the moment with all of that? So skills to learn that. And plus to identify her areas of growth. Because when we become dependent on certain things in our life, when we become dependent on, so she was dependent on success and praise. So she identified this pattern. So it is called, first of all, you have to identify a pattern. So she identified a pattern that when she didn't get it, the downward spiral began. So identified the pattern, thought of, what is the story that may be going through her mind with that. So what is she kind of really saying to herself? You sometimes can get to the story, sometimes you can't, but you can kind of get to it, that this is perhaps what I'm saying to myself. Then expand that story a little bit, bring your more wiser self and say, is this really true? Or is this, is it, what has my life experience taught me? Is this really true? Expand that a little bit. And with that, say, okay, where then do I need to grow? Because when we become dependent on something, then we don't develop certain qualities in us to be able to, because we are dependent on it, there is some skill development that needs to happen. And so identify what needs to be. So for this client in particular, it was the emotions. How does she deal with the emotions? Because then she would start binging. She would just go into that totally disconnect from the work, couldn't carry on anymore. So how do you manage that? This was skills development. How do you ride the wave of the emotion? And then how do you set structures in your life that make it easier on a daily basis to do that, so that you're building the muscle and it becomes easier over time?
Yeah, I'm listening to this. I'm just thinking, like, when people think about, binging and addiction and substance abuse in terms of like drugs and alcohol and food and whatever, but it can be, it can be just as damaging to be addicted to praise.
Oh,
because
definitely.
And you can't even go and buy praise at the store like you can chocolate cake. So you have to do all kinds of yoga moves just to get people to give you this thing that you so desire. And when you start patterning your life around that, we all know that person who's the ultimate people pleaser. By the way, I'm recovering from that, but I know how it is. It's like when you spend a lot of your time looking for external affirmation, it's an empty well that you will eventually, you're not going to be able to have anything to drink. So that all makes sense to me. And it sounds like a really integrated solution. Now, let's talk about the fact, you mentioned in your comments and in the book in particular, you talk about that this is different for women. So, women have a different set of behaviors, not to stereotypes, but there are, clearly some patterns. There's patterns around language. There's patterns around, women who are highly competent, but shy away from risks and opportunities, fear speaking up, have sort of like imposter syndrome, all kinds of stuff like that happening. What's going on? Like, talk about why things are different for women.
Well, many things.
It's a long topic, but but let's get into it.
Let's get into the quick one. Okay, so first, I think biology has a role to play. So, for example, one of the key things here is dealing with the emotional aspect of it. And I think women feel their emotions more. We are, our spatial awareness, we can catch on to little signs better. There are positives and negatives to everything. We're more sensitive by nature, more agreeable by nature. Sensitivity and agreeableness are primarily feminine traits. So there is that aspect of it. There is also a lot of times early experiences, and not that, if you grew up in the same household, a boy and a girl with the same parents, the girls, because of their sensitive nature, may take certain comments more to heart. And so, that it itself starts its own cycle. And then also society holds a high bar for women for success. For women in the workplace, often women are held to higher standards. There is so much research to show that. Often women, especially as they rise to more senior levels, they face that famous double bind of, too competent or too likable, either way held back. So there are many things that lead women to be more sensitive to external feedback, more wanting praise, more wanting approval. And so that kind of primes us towards this.
Now, this gets into attachment theory, right? because, and I want you to talk about this because I was reading about this in the book, and I've heard, we throw that term around, but to be honest with you, I was sort of like, I wanted to hear it from the writer herself. So talk about then how attachment theory plays into all of this, because it's really interesting. And it's one of those terms that, again, we throw around, but like, let's get into what it really means for people in their day-to-day lives.
So attachment theory plays a key role here simply because, like I was mentioning earlier, the key difference between the two types of high confidence is what lives in the implicit world. And the implicit world is heavily impacted by those very early years of our lives before the brain develops the capacity for conscious thought and reasoning. And so the experiences that we have before age 3 or so are mostly with our early caregivers. Now, again, I'm very careful here of, just saying, oh, everything was your caregiver's fault. It doesn't work like that, especially in this day and age. I mean, you look at little kids, they're 6 months old and they're holding an iPad, right? So there is so much more that goes in the implicit world than what your caregiver said. In fact, more and more what your caregivers say don't have that much of an impact. So, and there's a lot more. And then the implicit world doesn't just close after you hit age 3. There are so many other things that happen in life that can have that can stay kind of hanging in your implicit world because you don't make sense of them. They exceed your capacity to make sense of them. And so very challenging experiences, for example, toxic relationships, again, your own nature. I mean, again, it plays in with that. What your parents said to you maybe perhaps was just normal. They were saying it to all the siblings, but you somehow took it very strongly to heart because, again, of your own nature. Then I also talk about, something that happens in adolescence that's called pruning and myelination. Some of us are just genetically, we're just wired with less of those coping GABA neurotransmitters that help us calm our emotions. So something hits us more strongly. And so all of these factors lead to an implicit world that feels disempowered in some way. And so that is where attachment theory comes in. And so when I talk in the book about attachment theory, it is just to help you understand that, these are the two key insecure attachment styles, not in the clinical population, but in the regular population, you and I, who are just high strivers and trying to get somewhere because in a way we're trying to prove ourselves in some way. And so what are those two styles and what are the behaviors related to them and what are the thought patterns related to them, so that we just create that gentle, compassionate distance from them and don't take them to be the truth. There is not a lot that we can do with them. These are visceral, they are implicit, they happen on auto. And just saying that they shouldn't happen to me, these feelings shouldn't happen. No, they happen. There's very little we can do about it. So really trying to just not feel it anymore is kind of impossible. But what we can do is just create enough distance so that we don't engage in those behaviors because they're not serving us.
FOMO. Yeah, it's really true what you say. And I think about just my own sort of social circle and friends and professional contacts. And it's like, this is one of those things that a lot of people don't even think about until they hit their 30s and 40s. I don't know why that is. It's just sort of like you get to a point in your life where you start to recognize these patterns that are not serving you, and you start to be a little bit more inquisitive about where those things come from. And then you might dive back into, you either, work with a therapist or do psychedelics or whatever it is for you, and you start to have these realizations. And so this is if you haven't thought about this in the past, everybody, this is really worth doing. And I'm not saying to call your parents and tell them they broke you, by the way. That is not the play here. Yeah. And by the way, I've had dinner with Homaira's parents and they're wonderful people, so we won't be calling them, but I faced
challenging situations. Like I write about it in the book. I faced a very challenging situation. So for me, I think it had nothing to do with that. It was just that the situation that I faced just exceeded my capacity to deal with it. And so that's why the implicit is made up of all of these wonderful things.
Yeah, that's very good. Now, I do want to talk a little bit. You're from Pakistan. You live in Oman, which is one of the nicest places ever. And so, and you've lived elsewhere in the world, Canada, other places. Talk about the cross-cultural elements here, because gender is a major lens to think about these issues. But I got to think that, gender plus culture or just culture alone has a huge place. So how can we, for folks we have listeners everywhere all over the world. Hello, everybody. What's your viewpoint on this?
My viewpoint is there are certain things that are just global. They are part of being human. So, for example, the
Mm-hmm.
scars we get growing up are just part of being human. And back to your point that, it's not about blaming anybody. It's just part of being human. The world does this to us. It disconnects us from who we are. And, it scars us in many ways. Going to school, teachers, parents, like everything. At the end of the day, we just arrive at a place where we've been carrying these scars with us, and it's important to do the inner work and to go back there. So all of that, I think, is just the journey of life. And that is so that kind of that thing, I think, is just, it is just
It's
global. I don't
universal.
think, yeah,
It's
it's
the human
universal.
experience.
It is the
Yeah.
human experience. Exactly. Suffering is the human experience, right?
Yeah.
And so, and then, but then what I do find is, one of the key differences is that in this part of the world, in collectivist cultures, that sense of belonging is stronger. Uh, what's perhaps more missing is that sense of mastery, because for women, and I'm talking about women, they don't have
Mm-hmm.
as many opportunities to go out into the world to take risks, to do all of that, so they don't develop as much of that. And in the Western world, I find that the mastery aspect of it is stronger than the belonging aspect. And that again is a reflection of cultures, individualistic cultures, and also the way families have become single unit families, and a lot of, everything that has happened over the past 50, 60 years that has transformed family systems and all of that. I mean, here grandparents also live with you, and aunts and uncles also live with you, and everybody talks about their history, and they sit under the stars and they talk about it and all of that. So it does, that we talk about the implicit, right? It does sink in deep inside of you where you feel more grounded in that sense.
Oh, most definitely. And most definitely, I completely agree. I think it's when you travel around the world and you see people who live in, with all of the family around them. I mean, there's everything has its trade-offs, but
Yes.
there is a wholly different vibe around that. Now, talking about obviously how women are different in this aspect, one thing that I want to talk about here, because about half of our listeners are men, and I want to ask you, for the guys who are listening, who have been learning alongside, and I think a lot of this obviously applies to men as well, but for men who are hearing this and saying like, okay, get it, now I understand things are different. How can men be better colleagues, supervisors, friends, parents to women and girls? Like, what do we need to do to help to, address these challenges?
Awesome question. Awesome question. So I would say self-awareness. You see, for women, it's easier for the self awareness. And again, I'm talking in generalizations, okay?
Mm-hmm.
But our implicit world speaks to us in our heads because of the self doubt, because of all the things. I mean, we can hear it. We doubt ourselves all the time. We've heard it so much. We haven't been allowed to get too big headed about ourselves. So
Mm-hmm.
we doubt ourselves. We hear those thoughts in our heads. And so it's easier to work with them. Again, generalization for a lot of the men. They get the praise, they get the successes, and so sometimes they are not aware of areas of growth for themselves. So for men, fragile confidence can show up somewhat differently to the way it shows up for women. For women, it can show up a lot like low confidence as well, or a yo-yo between high and low, depending on what's happening around them. For men, it can show up more as sometimes feelings of superiority, and stuff like that. So I think just that self awareness, just being willing to be wrong, being willing to listen more and expand their perspective. Because the thing is, when fragile confidence gets very extreme, it can look, in the scientific literature, it can look a lot like narcissism. So you don't have, it is just, you are the right one and everybody else is wrong. It can. So, and that is again because that gap between what you think about yourself, I'm great, versus what you feel deep down about yourself is very wide. And the wider it gets, the more it starts looking like narcissistic behaviors. So, I mean, again, I'm sure there are very sensitive men out there as well. And for them, it may look more like the way it shows up for women. But generally you find that the more successful you get, and that happens for women as well, except that there are more men who are successful than women who are successful, unfortunately, again, because of a lot of things. But yeah, that can start widening the gap, and then that self-awareness starts becoming lower and lower. So I would just say again, self-awareness. Do some of that inner work and try to understand where do my behaviors come from? Why are they like this? Are they helping? Are they helping relationships? In fact, the relational aspect of it is very important, because where fragile confidence really struggles is with relationships at its extreme.
Yeah. It's this, you just nailed it. I tell you what, I just did an episode on how to deal with narcissists. Everybody, we all have our narcissist radar up, because I'm convinced that it's the narcissists, hello Elon Musk, hello Sam Bankman-Fried, that are just blowing up the world. So I'm not going to even mention some of the other ones, because, you know, it's too controversial. But anyway, it is something. And guys, if you're doing this kind of stuff, the thing, I mean, we can all do it, women, men, whatever. But if your sort of lack of confidence is showing up as obnoxious narcissism, I got to tell you what, everybody can see the emperor has no clothes. So, you know, just, it's not, your little act isn't working. So don't do that. It's going to catch up with you. Now, the book is called Goodbye Perfect: How to Stop Pleasing, Proving, and Pushing for Others and Live for Yourself. I like that. If you want to find out more about Homaira, you can go to her website. It's Homaira Kabir. That's HOMAIRA KABIR.com, where you can find out a lot more. I was there, and by the way, lots of free goodies. If you want free goodies, lots of free goodies. All right, Homaira Kabir, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Patrick. This was lovely. I really enjoyed it.
FOMO. If you like today's show, please be sure to rate it and recommend it to your friends. And as always, you can find me on Instagram at Patrick J. McGinnis, on Twitter at PJ McGinnis, and on the web at FOMOSapiens.com or PatrickMcGinnis.com, where you can get all kinds of free resources to live a more decisive and entrepreneurial life. FOMO Sapiens is recorded in New York City. Theme music is by Mike McGinnis, and editing and post-production is by Josh Elstro. If you like today's show, please be sure to rate it and recommend it to your friends. And as always, you can find me at FOMOSapiens.com and at PatrickMcGinnis.com. To advertise on FOMO Sapiens, reach out to contact@FOMOSapiens.com. FOMO. FOMO.